everybody. Richard Hill from the Mind Science Institute here, looking at another week of fascinating stuff. I've been having a number of conversations over email and various ways with a good friend of mine, Alan Ivey, Emeritus Professor at Massachusetts University. There's wonderful work, micro skills in counselling, brilliant man. And what Alan, and through some of our interactions, is becoming particularly interested in, and it's wonderful to see, is this area of the metabolism, of the body functions and the nature of the way the brain works. And it's really important. So I just want to highlight one of the things. It's not a new one. It's actually from 2012, December 2012, and it's the Scientist magazine. I'll have the reference down below. This magazine article has other references that you can follow, but it's looking at this nature of the way in which our metabolism, our body functions, actually are important to our brain. Remember the whole problem with the dualism is the brain and the body are not necessarily directly affecting each other, but as I say so often, look at this, it's connected and it's hollow. So what are some of the things? And I've just made a few notes. Always, it's really important to remember, and always to preface these things, association is not necessarily cause, but association can also reflect a relationship, a integration, a part of the interplay. So there are a number of things you have to think about. What is direct, what is single-stepped, what is actually a broader aspect of it. But there are so many things we're seeing now in relation to various more serious things, quite serious things, schizophrenia, bipolar, ADHD, but also just straight up things, the affective depressions, stress, anxiety, do have a direct relationship to metabolic processes and lifestyle practices. Certainly the first thing you should do if someone comes in with a negative, with a down, with a depressed mood, or even with a psychopathological disorder, is get them to have some exercise. Go for a walk. Give a good hour-long, strong, energetic walk. And what are some of the things they talk about? Depression. People with depression are 60% more likely to have problems with diabetes too. This also you can see with schizophrenia and other psychotic diseases, particularly from the medications, the second generation antipsychotics. They tend to give problems in the metabolism, whereas we used to give them heart attacks, now we give them diabetes too with these medications. And insulin resistance is one of the really important things to understand. This nature of where the insulin receptors in the body shut down in order to cope with the excessive amount of sugar, or the excessive, which of course stimulates insulin, because the insulin grabs the glucose, runs around to the cell. If there are receptors, it chucks the glucose into the cell, but if there are no receptors, it then takes that glucose off and deposits it in adipose tissue, in the fat tissue. And so if the cells have got plenty of energy and plenty of food, then we start to put on weight. But equally, if we overdose with sugar, as we do when we have these huge processed, a big chocolate bar, then what it does is it freaks out the cells. And what we have evolved very successfully and quite appropriately is when there is an excess, it's safer to shut down the receptive system, the receptors, because it might be that this excess is a poison. Equally, we have it when we have a lack. When we have a lack of things, we also shut down the receptors and the receiving, because we might be in a famine or another ecological crisis. So this insulin resistance builds up, and in this case, the glucose comes along with the insulin. The insulin says, no receptors, I'm taking it away. But the cell actually says, yeah, I've shut down receptors because you freaked me out because there's so much of you, but actually I still need food. So 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes later, you're feeling hungry again, and off you go and you have another chocolate bar. And so suddenly you find you've had lots of chocolate bars, you're actually not getting any more energy, and you're packing on the pounds. But the impact in the brain of excessive insulin is so interesting. We used to think that insulin didn't get into the brain, but about 30, 40 years ago we figured out that insulin does actually pass through the blood-brain barrier. Then we didn't think it did much particularly, but then we found insulin receptors, and particularly in the midbrain area and relation to dopaminergic processes, dopaminergic areas in the midbrain. And we found certainly that if you reduce the numbers of receptors, that you actually dysregulate or disorganize the appetitive process, and so people will eat more. So it's not only the insulin resistance in the body, it's also a shift of insulin reception in the brain, and all this leads to more appetite, and all this leads to more fat, all these problems, all these things of we are not designed to eat the food that is presented to us in the snack bar. Also, just adding on to that, don't forget that we also talk about cytokines, the inflammatory processes. They stimulate microglia, and give all kinds of problems there. So we need to balance ourselves with food, with diet, with exercise, with sleep. They're the first things. Then we may actually have to come in with our processes like medications to try and get things in balance, but only to get them to stop the excesses, but to bring us back into sense. Then what we want to do is we want to then have good talk therapy so that we give ourselves balanced in the way we approach life. Quick one, because I'm talking lots. This wonderful thing in Australia, Sydney, Australia, done by the Childhood Trauma Foundation. Really important conference, on trauma, with everybody that you want to go and see. Dan Siegel, Ed Tronick, Alan Shaw, Dan Hughes. We got Pat Ogden's coming. Who else is coming? Tronick, I said, Sue Carter and Stephen Porges. All the people that I pay thousands of dollars to go overseas to see coming here. It's going to cost you a little bit because we've got to fly them over, I suppose, but it's worth every penny. I've gone on too far, so I'll have a reference to that as well. Check it out. That's later on in the year, August. So in August, so plenty of time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. See you later. Bye.
Hello, Matthew. It's Dr. Dave here again. And first of all, let me say what a fine job you're doing with the neuropsychotherapist. It is of such high quality, and the scientists that you've been able to attract to submit articles are just stellar. So I just can't give you enough praise about what a wonderful job you're doing. And of course, the other reason I'm here is to let you know about my latest podcast interview, which is number 401. And I interviewed the author of this book, Out of the Blue, 6 Non-Medication Ways of Working with Depression, of Treating Depression, by Bill O'Hanlon. And I'm not sure if you or your listeners, readers, viewers are familiar with Bill O'Hanlon. He's one of my favorite guys out there, and he's written 36 books. This is the 36th book. And imagine many of you will have heard of him because he leads workshops all over the world. And he's a high energy guest, and I've always been a little bit envious of him because he studied as a young man with the famous psychiatrist and hypnotherapist Milton Erickson, who I've always been a big fan of. And Bill O'Hanlon had the good fortune of being a young man, just kind of, I think, in college or recently out of college, and very interested in becoming a counselor. And in order to kind of pay for the session, for the training, and to be close by, he became Milton Erickson's gardener for a year. And he really absorbed, he got the knowledge. He really absorbed it in a very deep way. And so, why not 6 non-medication ways? Why risk taking medications and risking side effects and other downsides of taking a medication when we know that the brain can be changed by good verbal therapy? And so I think all the therapists who see this are going to want to have a copy of this book. And anybody out there who may be suffering from depression, I highly recommend this book as well. So that's maybe enough said about it for this time. Hey, if you're interested in more, just go to Shrink Rap Radio, the latest one coming up, episode number 401, and you can listen to my interview with Bill O'Hanlon, and that will help you make up your mind.